welcome to Improbable Things. I'm J. Grace Pennington, and this is my podcast where I share 6 improbable thoughts about breakfast, which means 6 thoughts about reading, writing, or sometimes science fiction. So I've got my 6 things, and I'm ready to share them with you, so let's dive in. Number 1, I wanted to give another update on how Firmament Humanoid is going, and I do feel like I've at least partly gotten out of the slump that I've been in. It is a little more interesting, the parts that I'm writing now, at least to me. And I actually just broke 30,000 words yesterday. So in a sense, I feel like it's going well. I've been able to be consistent, and I am getting to a part that I'm a little bit more motivated by, that I find a little bit easier to write. So that's always a plus. But I am curious how this is going to go, because by word count, it should be approximately like 3/5 of the way. And yet I feel like where we are in the story, it's not really even quite halfway through. So we'll see. Sometimes it's just hard to get a sense of it while you're in the middle of the writing. And I mean, the only reason it matters is because I don't really have time to write more than, about 45,000 to 50,000 words before I need to start working on the editing for Eleftheria. So I just need to, I might have to do the end later or something. If it's going to be more words than that, I might have to put that off for a little bit, which would be kind of a bummer because it might make me lose momentum a little bit, but we'll just see. It's quite possible that it's just going to wrap up more quickly than I think. I normally do not have a problem of books or any works being too long. They're always too short, and I'm always having to add things to reach the necessary word count. So we'll just see, but I do feel like overall it's going well. And number 2, we're also kind of getting into the part of the story where it is starting to dig into kind of philosophical dilemmas and just sort of those deep, that's what I love about science fiction. I think I've mentioned this before, is that you can take like these moral and philosophical dilemmas and like really deep thoughts and like even abstract concepts and really give them a concreteness where you can explore these things more easily than sometimes you can in other kinds of fiction, because you have these fantastic circumstances and you can take a seed of reality and expand it out until it can really reveal something about an important subject. And that is, I think, partly why I am getting more interested in the part that I'm writing now, is because that's where we're really starting to explore these things. And kind of the main theme of the book is coming out more and more. And I'm just a big nerd about that stuff, about really delving into hard topics through stories. And that's something like each of the Firmament books has some theme that is important to me and that I really try to build the plot around. And this one in particular, I've been really excited about for a long time because of the theme and because of some of the things I'm going to explore. And it's one of those ones, there's actually several Firmament books where they were hugely inspired, in a sense inspired by Star Trek, but where I was looking at Star Trek and saying, oh, like I love this subject, but they got it so wrong. Like I need to do it from a Christian perspective. So the subject in this book is one of those kinds of things where I was just like, oh, I need to do it right. So we'll see if that comes across well, but I'm enjoying it. And then number 3, a little update on the progress with Eleftheria. I did get a mock-up for part of the cover from my artist, and I'm so excited. He did an amazing job of delivering what I had asked for, and he just sent me a sketch of the character who's going to be on the cover. And so I've just been kind of like pondering it for the past few days, trying to think whether it needs any changes or if it's good. And I mean, it's definitely good. It's very impressive. And I feel like he got what I was asking for, but I'm still, it's hard for me. It's like I can't visualize things. I'm not an artist. And so if I do feel like maybe there's, 1 or 2 things that could be tweaked, I'm not always sure how to articulate that. And so sometimes it just takes me a few days to just like look at it, go off, think, come back, look at it again, and be like, okay, maybe there's this small thing or something. But I may not even have anything for him, honestly, because he did an amazing job. So probably actually need to email him back today about that and let him know my thoughts. So we can continue to get moving on that. And then number 4, I wanted to talk, and I think I may have gone over this a little bit in another episode, but just when it comes to, because, I have this big reading goal this year, and sometimes it can be a struggle for me anyway to decide what to read next. And sometimes there is a very clear answer. Like sometimes, usually like because of book club or maybe because of something going on in my life, I'm like, okay, well, I have to read this. Maybe I have to read this before the third Thursday so that I can have it read for book club. Or like, oh, I'm really dealing with this with my kids, and so I think this parenting book would be really helpful, so I need to read that right now. But overall, a lot of it is just so much free space for reading that really I could read whatever, and I really struggle with making decisions if there's not a clear reason. And so I know one thing I've mentioned is that sometimes if I literally have no other criteria, I'll just start going like in order from like left to right, top to bottom across my bookshelf. But I haven't done that in a while, and it's because like I've had other things going on where I kind of need to read this or that. But one thing lately is I've started on a couple of series. I started on the I mentioned these in the past. I think the Mary Russell Sherlock Holmes series, and then also the Mysterious Benedict Society. And so those obviously kind of give me some answers, but even then it becomes this game of, well, what do I do first? Because now it's almost like I have too many books. I mean, honestly, I could probably like just off the top of my head give you like 200 books that are on my to read list. Like, it's ridiculous. And so sometimes just the sheer volume of things that I want to get through can kind of paralyze me, because I'll be like, well, where do I start on this monumental task? So it's just always interesting. Like, I feel like, and just because like I make everything too black and white and take everything too seriously, I'll always be like, well, what should I read next? Like, what's the right decision? So for instance, right now, I am reading my book club book, so that was an obvious one. But even with that, I tend to be like, well, when should I start it? Like, I don't want to start too late, obviously, and not be able to do it. But I also don't want to start like too early, because then I might like forget a lot of it before book club rolls around. But also then like maybe sometimes that will cause me to wait too long and like not be able to finish it or be rushing. So there's that whole thing, of course. But I did go ahead and start it, even though book club is not for a few more weeks. So I've got that going, and then right now I'm also reading the second of the Mysterious Benedict Society books, and that was partly because I had that from the library, and so obviously I needed to get it done before it had to go back. So those were just some obvious things. But then also I've just started like making a physical stack on my nightstand of books in order, like maybe the next 4 or 5 books that I'm going to read in the order I'm going to read them, because otherwise when I finish a book, I'll often just get in this sort of like I don't know, like I said, almost like paralyzed by too many options. And so I've started just like, as I'm reading, or even just like as I'm going about my life, I'll think, oh, either I'll, maybe a situation will come up where I'm like, oh, I should read this parenting book or whatever, one of those kinds of things like I mentioned. Or I'll just be like, there's this classic book or whatever, some book I've been wanting to read for a long time. I'm just going to go ahead and stick that on my to read pile, because I really want to make sure I get to that. And so I'll just I've just started having this little stack on my nightstand of, like I said, the next 4 or 5 books, and they're just stacked up in the order that I'm going to read them, so that when I finish a book, I can just reach over there and grab the next one. And honestly, like, it might sound silly. Probably most people are not as like intense about these decisions as I am, but it really has helped me. It actually, like, in a small way, makes my life a little bit easier. So I'm all about that. Well, number 5, again on the currently reading subject, I mentioned I'm reading my book club book, and the book for this month is Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty, and it is her latest book. I think it came out last fall, like maybe in September or October, I don't remember for sure. And I knew immediately that I was going to suggest it for my book club, because they love Liane Moriarty books, and But they read most of them before I was part of it. And so I only gotten to discuss one of her books with them, and it was basically like her worst book. Like, it was awful. So I was really excited for the opportunity to discuss what was hopefully a better book. And so far, definitely, I'm really pulled in, really enjoying it, very mystified. I think it's going to be a really good discussion. And so I'm really glad I suggested it, and so did some other people. Like, it was an obvious choice for us. So I think it was definitely a good option. But one thing that probably the thing I appreciate most about her writing is that I feel she's very good at showing honest characters, and just characters that feel very true to life, like more than most authors that I've read. Like, it really stands out to me. And one way that she does that is through showing different perspectives. And I think that's part of what makes it ring so true to me, is that she always has various different perspectives of things that are going on. She's never in just one person's head. Like, she'll usually have not only a few different characters who we, see into their heads and their motivations, etc., but she'll usually also sometimes just have you in the head of like some random person, like a waiter that was waiting on the characters at some restaurant and her thoughts about them or whatever. And so I think that's one thing that you can't get in life, but we all know that it's going on, where we all have our own perspectives and we see each other differently, and other people see us differently than we see ourselves. And I think that Moriarty does an amazing job of communicating that. Like, you'll often, be in one person's head and, hear their own thoughts about themselves and their insecurities and their perspective on what's going on. And then you'll see maybe the same person or even the same situation from someone else's point of view, and how it looks totally different. And maybe the first person was, feeling really insecure or was really distracted or whatever during this interaction, and to the other person they think, oh, she seems so confident or whatever. It could be completely different. And that is so often how I know that it is in real life, that we come across so differently to each other than we feel to ourselves. And I enjoy reading about that. I think it's not only does it make for really true to life characters and situations, but it's kind of a good reminder. Like, it's a good reminder, like, the way that I feel and see myself and think that I'm portraying myself to others is not always what is going to come across. And that also is going to vary from person to person and their own prejudices and their own experiences. And, it's just the way we see each other and the way we see ourselves is always just going to be different and have a lot of nuance to it. And then also, like, there's a lot of, I think, relatable quirks to her characters, like things that are very, again, true to life, like things that you might not often think of to put, or at least I guess things that when I'm making a character, I might not think of personality quirks that are this real and this relatable, and things where I go like, oh yeah, like it just makes it feel like a real person. Just like weird little things, like, oh, I'm trying to think of an example. Like, for instance, there's a character in the book that I'm reading now where she, like, every time she drives somewhere, she just has a really hard time getting out of the car. Like, she just, something in her head or something, she just like struggles to, just get out of the car and go on to whatever she's doing. Like, it's a battle every time. And I'm like, that's just, it is unique and interesting, and yet it really does. And especially as you learn about the character, you can kind of go like, okay, yes, you can kind of see, like, psychologically or from her past or whatever, where that's coming from. But it's interesting and it's different, and real people have those kinds of things. Like, we have quirks and struggles and things that are just like weird and unique to us, and that's portrayed really well in her books, I think. So just as a writer, I'm admiring that and trying to like learn from it, take all these mental notes to see how I can do that sort of thing with my characters. And then number 6, I wanted to just jump off of that a little bit to talk about reality in books and how much reality is too much reality. I heard a quote one time, and I can't remember from who, that it said that in fiction we're basically treated to a world where characters have to eat, but they never have to go to the bathroom. And I thought that was a good way of just like summing up that version of reality that sometimes can be in fiction, where there are things like, yes, like if we don't eat, we'll starve, but you don't hear about like the certain aspects of just the mundaneness of real life. And I think to a certain extent that can be good, but it is a really hard balance because I think, and it depends some on the book and on different preferences, obviously, because there is part of me that thinks, and I have mentioned, like, even in the Firmament series, sometimes there's been a situation where I'm like, I want to address that people do need to go to the bathroom, like, just even in a small way, because I do think that adds some realism that can sometimes be really good, because honestly, this is a huge part of our life. And sometimes it's good to see it reflected. But on the other hand, obviously, you don't want too much. Like, you can't describe, like, for instance, if you wanted to be really realistic, you could describe every single second of someone's day and every step that they take down the hall and how they, like, moved their hand toward the doorknob and turned it and opened the door. And then they took one step through and then they stopped and looked at the wall and they noticed this and then they took another. Like, I could do that and it would be, in general, like, that would be so boring because we all know that. Like, nobody wants to read about every single little tiny detail of life because we all live it. Like, that's not what we're coming to fiction for. And again, there's a place for that. Like, maybe if you're trying to, like, build suspense, you can draw it out by showing every little detail. I'm not saying there's never a place for it, but just, I mean, obviously you don't want to give every single thing and you don't want to make it too mundane and too real life, because then people won't want to read it. Like, again, we all know about that. We all live it. That's not why we're here. That's not why we're reading. So I just find that a very difficult balance personally, like, and especially because I do struggle with description and logistics and things like that, is I'm like, I don't want to say like where every person was standing in the room because, like, that's just boring. Who cares? But it's not interesting to read about or to write about, in my opinion. But then also, I can't have it be so disembodied that the reader has no image of what's going on. Like, there, and so I just struggle with, like, okay, well, when do you need to know these things? When do I need to communicate where everyone is in the room, or what order they walked through the door, or that someone, was late to the meeting for this, like, tiny reason, or I don't know, just every little thing. When do I need to show those things, and when is that just, like, too much information and stuff that nobody wants? And because you're in your own head, obviously, as a writer, it's really hard to know that, which again is where readers come in.